New hope for steelworkers at Tata's plants in the UK. Unions and bosses make a deal. More investment and a commitment to making steel at Port Talbot and other plants. Unions say thousands of jobs could be saved.
To secure a two-furnace operation, to secure a 5-year commitment, to secure the future investment is very significant.
The workers will get the final say on the plan in a union ballot. Also on tonight's programme.
My name's Denise.
A BBC investigation finds a 5-fold increase in the number of patients waiting in A&E for a hospital bed in England. The Supreme Court judges weigh Scotland's case for having a say in the Brexit process. Just weeks before Christmas, farmers are told to keep their poultry indoors as bird flu sweeps across Europe.
And away they go.
And remembering a golden age of British motorsport, Silverstone is to get a £20 million museum.
And coming up in the sport on BBC News, FIFA President Gianni Infantino wants to expand the World Cup to 48 teams, split into 16 groups. A final decision will be made in January.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. Thousands of jobs at Tata Steelworks in Port Talbot and elsewhere look secure tonight after unions and management hammered out a deal, ending months of uncertainty. The company, which put the business up for sale in March, has now made a 5-year commitment to steelmaking. In return, the unions are considering changes to the company pension scheme. The plan will now go to a ballot of workers. Let's join our Wales correspondent, Sian Lloyd, who's at Port Talbot. Sian.
Well, George, this meeting really went up to the wire and it's understood that it was difficult at times. It's now up to the company to sell this to the members. The future is in the hands of the workers. If they agree to this proposal, well, there could be a ballot early in the new year.
It's been a dark year for the workforce at Port Talbot. But as dawn broke over the plant this morning, there was a glimmer of hope that a more certain future could be on the horizon. The blast furnaces have kept on working, but no one knew for how long. Prospective buyers were unwilling to take on the liability of the company's pension scheme. Today's announcement comes after months of negotiations between the company and union representatives. So what is the proposal that unions will take to their members? There's a commitment by the company to running the 2 blast furnaces at Port Talbot for at least 5 years. A 10-year £1 billion investment plan, a commitment to try to avoid compulsory redundancies for at least 5 years, but Tata would consult on closing the British Steel pension plan and replacing it with a defined contribution scheme.
The hit is the British Steel pension going.
Yeah, there is. There's a question mark, and the workforce will make the decision whether it's acceptable at the end of the day. But Tata are saying there's no way they could support the British Steel pension and the future investment needed.
Chris James is just about to go on shift. He's taking in today's news.
The fact they've got 5 years now, pretty much guaranteed year, that's very good news. £1 billion investment over the next 10 years. Again, that's really good news as well. Pension, I mean, it doesn't affect me so much because I haven't been here that long, but some of the boys in there, they got 25, 30 years paid into pension, they're planning to retire at a certain time. They're going to have to find out the details about what's involved now if the pension scheme does close.
Workers will have a lot to consider over the coming weeks. Tata, in effect, have made a U-turn.
You would recognise that it has been an extremely difficult time for Tata Steel in terms of financial performance last year, and since then many things have changed. One is that there is a transformation plan that has started working.
The uncertainty has been felt by the local community too. People have built businesses and their livelihoods around the plant.
It's not just steelworks, it's the contractors that go in. And like myself, I rely on the contractors and the steel company.
Tata's annual Christmas party for workers and their families went ahead as usual last night. Families here have now been given an offer of security, but there will be a price to pay. Sian Lloyd, BBC News, Port Talbot.
Let's look into this a little more with our industry correspondent, John Moylan. John, just months ago, Tata were looking to bail out. What exactly has changed?
Well, one of the issues is that they cut costs. If you remember at the beginning of the year, they cut around 1,000 staff, and that's helped put the business on a firmer footing. But they've also been helped by increasing prices of steel around the world. Let's take a look at what's called hot rolled coil. It's what they make down at Port Talbot. If you go back to January 2015, it was trading at £355 a tonne, but a year later, it was right down at around £250 a tonne. If we bring that up to date, today, it's now trading much closer to £435 a tonne. So there's been a really big improvement. That has helped things. Why has the price of steel gone up? Because raw material costs that go into steel making, they've gone up. But also because in places like the EU and the US, they've got their act together. They've started to impose tariffs on unfairly traded steel, what are called anti-dumping duties. Now, there are big questions still tonight for the steel industry and also for Tata, not least over what happens to the huge pension scheme that is weighing over the firm, and questions for government too. There's no suggestion tonight that the government has done a post-Brexit Nissan-style deal to make this all happen. The government would argue it has helped with issues like energy prices, but what the industry wants to know is steel part of the government's long-term planning, and will steel be at the heart of the government's forthcoming industrial strategy?
All right, John, thank you very much. There's more evidence today of the strain the NHS in England is under. A BBC investigation has found that in the last year, nearly 500,000 patients had to wait for more than 4 hours for a bed on a ward. And that's despite being taken to hospital for an emergency. That's a 5-fold increase over the course of 5 years. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, reports.
Patients coming through A&E may need to be admitted to hospital, but for an increasing number, finding a bed on a ward is more difficult. Waits are getting longer.
It was a nightmare.
Rupert Nathan has a history of heart problems. In June, he developed chest pains and called an ambulance, fearing he was having a heart attack. But after getting to hospital and being told he'd be admitted for tests, he still had to wait more than 5 hours.
I should have been seen straight away, not made to wait.
And how were you feeling while you were waiting?
I was really very worried. The pain was so great that I felt that I mightn't see the next morning.
BBC analysis of NHS England figures shows an increasing number of patients enduring long waits on trolleys or chairs before being assigned a bed. 11% of emergency patients had to wait over 4 hours last year. That's a big jump from 2011, when just 2.7% were experiencing long waits. Last year, nearly 500,000 people were affected by long delays before a bed was available.
Delays for patients waiting to be found beds in hospitals are part of the overall strain currently being felt right across the NHS. So how can it be dealt with? Well, this hospital has found new ways to manage patients from the moment they arrive.
At Kingsmill Hospital in Mansfield, it's made very clear to patients where they should go on arrival. Just inside the door, there's a separate area for GPs to treat those who are not seriously ill. That cuts down the numbers moving into the hospital needing beds. Meanwhile, social workers sit alongside NHS staff. They're planning the speedy transfer of elderly patients back to the community as soon as they're well enough.
We can maybe look at getting you home.
That in turn frees up beds. Working with local community leaders, they've moved from having some of the longest waits to being one of the best performers.
It's in the context of removing the normal organisational boundaries, so we've thought what is best for patients here. These little things, when you join them up and line them up, deliver a significant change.
The Department of Health said the vast majority of patients were admitted quickly. There aren't comparable figures for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but data does suggest pressure in all NHS hospitals. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Mansfield.
The Brexit appeal at the Supreme Court has been hearing from Scotland's most senior legal officer today. He's been argued that because Scotland will be affected by UK leaving the European Union, the Scottish Parliament, and not just Westminster, should be consulted before Article 50 is triggered. That's the mechanism that will authorise negotiations with the EU. Here's our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
Scotland's most senior lawyer brought a new argument to the Supreme Court today. They're hearing from all four home nations, with the Scottish Government claiming Not only should there be a vote in Westminster before Article 50 is invoked, but also insisting there's a constitutional convention which says there should be a vote in the Scottish Parliament as well.
There is plenty of evidence, including statements by the United Kingdom government, which I've referred to in my case, about the importance of this convention to the working of the devolution settlement. The United Kingdom has been...
I'm sure the convention. I mean, conventions are incredibly important, but
indeed.
They're not legally binding. That's their nature.
Indeed. And what I can also say is that the United Kingdom Parliament decided that this convention should be enacted into statute.
The court also heard submissions from Northern Ireland.
The giving of an Article 50 notice will frustrate the purpose and intention of the Northern Ireland Act,
arguing that Brexit could unlawfully affect the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process. Since the Scottish Parliament was opened by the Queen, there has been a convention that if Westminster wants to legislate on devolved matters, they first seek the consent of the Scottish Parliament. That's why, today, the Scottish Government are arguing if there is to be a vote in Westminster on Article 50, there should also be one in the Scottish Parliament, because leaving the EU affects so many of the policy areas that are controlled by Holyrood. Lord Sewell, a former Scottish Office Minister, devised the Sewell Convention, which describes when the Scottish Parliament should be allowed to have its say. He believes that because Holyrood has no power over foreign policy, there's no need for them to have a vote on Brexit.
The 1998 Act says that foreign affairs, and specifically matters to dealing with the European communities and the European institutions, is reserved, whereas the Convention deals purely and simply with devolved matters.
Scotland voted to stay in the EU by a substantial majority, 62% for Remain. If they get the chance, the Scottish Parliament is likely to vote against triggering Article 50. But Holyrood does not have a veto. They cannot stop the UK leaving the EU. It would be politically explosive if the Scottish Parliament votes against triggering Article 50, but Westminster decides to ignore it and go ahead anyway. Nothing like that's ever happened before, and the SNP would use it to strengthen their arguments for a second referendum on Scottish independence. Of course, if the Supreme Court decides the Scottish Parliament does not get to have a vote on Brexit, that will be politically inflammatory too. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Edinburgh.
A Pakistan International Airlines plane carrying almost 50 people has crashed just north of the capital, Islamabad. Pictures from the scene show a trail of wreckage in flames on a mountain. The army has recovered some bodies from the site. The national carrier has been accused of safety failures in the past, though it's unclear what caused this crash. Rescue workers in the northern Indonesian province of Aceh are searching for survivors after a powerful earthquake killed nearly 100 people in the early hours of the morning. The Indonesian authorities say the 6.5 magnitude quake damaged hundreds of buildings in the same area that was devastated by the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004. There are nearly 4 million people in Britain still living in poverty, despite being in work. According to research by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, that's a record figure. People are classified as poor if they have to make ends meet on less than 60% of the average income, or about £14,500 for a couple with no children. Here's our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
Mark Payne lives just outside Glasgow. Delivery driver, 3 children, earning £12,500 a year. A member of a growing band of the working poor. High food costs, high rents, frozen benefits. A toxic mix for those who are only just about managing.
All the cost of living's getting higher, but wages have probably stagnated for the last 7-8 years, maybe more. And it just makes it harder for trying to budget week on week. Food shopping, utility bills, all that kind of stuff. As I say, all different costs comes up, birthdays, and especially this time Christmas, and at this moment in time I have no clue where Christmas is coming for.
This is the picture of the UK's working poor. There are now 31.7 million people who have a job in Britain, a record. But of those, 3.8 million are below the official poverty line, For a single person, that means earning less than £7,300 a year. More than 12% of the working population, 1 in every 8, is classed as in poverty.
More people are in work, but that means that we're having more people in those low-paid jobs, but also not able to get enough hours to actually get the money for the household, and particularly if you're balancing caring for children, for older people, for disabled people, it can be very hard to get that balance right.
If you're just managing.
Concern about the just managing classes goes to the very top.
I know you're working around the clock. I know you're doing your best, and I know that sometimes life can be a struggle.
Globalization is associated with low wages, with insecure jobs, with stateless corporations, and striking inequalities.
Two people who have staked their reputations on creating an economy that works for all, which it isn't at the moment.
This is the major issue at the top of every politician's in tray, the people who feel left behind. The government's actually been quite successful dealing with absolute poverty, people in workless households. Employment is at record rates. But when it comes to in-work poverty, it's almost undermining that very British statement, an honest day's pay for an honest day's work.
Usually what happens is...
Cynthia Ganesh-Panchen runs a charity in Leicester. Its food bank was launched for people out of work. Now the employed on low wages are coming through the door.
The promise we've been given, I think, generation after generation, if you work hard, you will have a decent life. And I think that promise which is broken, because no longer people who work hard are having access to that decent life which was promised to us.
Time to act. In partnership, many argue, the government and businesses investing in training, building affordable homes, paying more, creating a wealthier economy which can be shared more widely. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
And the time is 16 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. Months of uncertainty for thousands of Tata Steel workers could be at an end. Unions and managers strike a deal to save the plants. Still to come.
A great day for Graham Hill.
Remembering the characters and cars of British motorsport with a new museum at Silverstone.
Coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, Alistair Cook will have another new opening partner for England's 4th Test against India, which starts tomorrow in Mumbai. Durham's Keaton Jennings is named in place of the injured Hasib Hamid.
Poultry farmers have been told to keep their birds indoors to protect them from a highly infectious strain of bird flu, which is affecting flocks in Europe. The precautionary measure will last 30 days and applies to all those who keep chickens, turkeys and ducks, including domestic owners. The government says the risk to humans is low. Our Rural Affairs correspondent Claire Marshall joins us now from a turkey farm in Essex. Claire.
Thank you, George. These are free-range birds. They shouldn't be in this shed, but tonight strict new laws are in force. Normally they'd be out wandering the fields and in the woods beside me, but just like in Scotland and in Wales, now they have to be kept under cover until all risk of bird flu has gone. That could be as many as 30 days.
It's the end of roaming time for these free-range turkeys. Paul Kelly is rearing them for the Christmas dinner table. Now these 6,000 have to be driven inside, away from any potentially infected migrating birds. It's a precaution. No cases have been found in the UK yet.
I don't lose sleep anymore because you kind of get used to it, but October, November are really, not traumatic months, but you're really, really worried because it can happen at any time. And it's not if there's going to be an outbreak. Of course, I'm sure there will be an outbreak in the future. It's when it's going to happen, and you just hope it's not going to happen too close to Christmas, and you're sure as hoping it's not going to happen too close to your farm or on one of our farms. It's very worrying.
In just a few weeks, this highly infectious strain of bird flu has raced westwards across Europe. From Romania to Germany, tens of thousands of birds are having to be culled. This was a goose farm in Poland on Sunday. And this, a cordon thrown up around a duck farm in southwest France last week, where 2,000 birds died from the virus. So now anyone who keeps any birds, even just a few chickens in the back garden, has to keep them inside for a month. Even when birds are housed, a risk of infection remains, so the government is advising people to disinfect clothing and equipment, reduce poultry movement, and to take all possible measures to reduce contact between poultry and wild birds.
The worry for not just me but the whole industry is public perception, because if bird flu arrives in the country, there's a big media scare, and we're used to food scares now, so it's not so bad, but shall we eat our Christmas turkey? Are we going to die if we eat our Christmas turkey or chicken? Which frankly is absolute nonsense. It's all hype. Of course it's totally 100% safe.
Some 9 million turkeys will be eaten this Christmas. Around half have already been slaughtered. Just a few weeks to go, this scare couldn't have come at a more critical time of the year. Claire Marshall, BBC News, Chelmsford.
The American drugs company Pfizer has been fined a record £84 million for overcharging the NHS for an epilepsy treatment. The Competition and Markets Authority described the massive price hike as deliberate and said it cost the taxpayer tens of millions of pounds. Pfizer has said it will appeal. Here's our business correspondent Emma Simpson.
It's one of the world's biggest drug companies. For decades, it's made an epilepsy drug called Epagneton, used by 48,000 patients in the UK. Here's how it soared in price.
In 2012, Pfizer sold the distribution rights of the drug to Flynn Pharma, a UK company. Its brand name was removed and therefore not subject to price controls. The companies whacked the prices up. Overnight, a 100 milligram packet went from just under £3 to more than £67. The price tag for the NHS, an extra £48 million.
The NHS had no option but to pay up because epilepsy patients usually shouldn't be switched to other products. In other words, there was no choice, and that's why the competition watchdog went after them.
Well, we have imposed the highest fine in British competition history on Pfizer, and that's because we take this extremely seriously. The victims of this are the NHS, which is all of us as taxpayers and all of us as users of the NHS who find money is being spent on this rather than on services we would want.
Pfizer rejects the findings, saying, "In this transaction and in all of our business operations, we approach this divestment with integrity and believe it fully complies with established competition law." It plans to appeal, as does Flynn Pharma. The watchdog says 4 other cases are being looked at, but legislation is already making its way through Parliament, which should see this loophole closed. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
New powers are to come into force in England and Wales to help protect people from being stalked. It comes as the number of stalking offences reported to police increased by more than 1,000 in the past year. New protection orders will be used to stop stalkers from approaching victims or sending them messages, and could result in jail if they are broken. Even before he's become president, Donald Trump has been named as Time magazine's Person of the Year for 2016. He'll be inaugurated as America's 45th leader in January. Mr. Trump was one of 11 contenders for the title, including Nigel Farage and Beyoncé. Sir Sterling Moss, Sir Jackie Stewart, Nigel Mansell, the great names of British motorsport. Now they're to be honoured and remembered in a museum dedicated to the sport at the home of Formula One in Britain, Silverstone. The £20 million project has been given the go-ahead, with nearly half the money coming from the Heritage Lottery Fund. Duncan Kennedy reports.
0 to thrilling in 5 seconds. Silverstone is British motor racing.
Sterling Moss was on the racetrack again.
It's drivers like Sterling Moss who've helped create legends here.
He was at Silverstone only 2 days.
A sporting story now finally to be told in a new museum.
I think for people who go up there, they'll see what it's all about, see how things started, what's been done, and you know, it's just a good idea, just an important thing.
While some heritage can live in the slow lane, Grand Prix winner Mark Webber says the new museum will house 70 years of speed. How important is it to remember the past?
I think to have a facility that we can demonstrate what's happened in the past, but also going forward with incredibly, the technical advancement that we have in Formula One and car racing in general is brilliant.
Well, Mark here won 2 Grand Prix at Silverstone. The history of the greats goes back decades. The new museum will be dedicated to the drivers and their machines, and of course, the emotion of motorsport. Even Nico Rosberg, the new Formula One world champion, is supporting it. He told us motorsport only progresses by remembering the past.
For sure, yeah, the heritage of the sport is massively important, and it has such an incredible heritage as well, you know. And as I said, I'm a huge fan. I love looking back at the old things. So I hope one day I'll be able to go to that heritage centre and see all the stuff you've got in there.
£20 million will be spent creating the museum out of this World War II hangar, with most from the Heritage Lottery Fund.
It's the very centre of global motorsport, but that story isn't told anywhere, and it's important also to tell the fantastic history of British motor racing. The 70 years of motor racing history at Silverstone, starting in 1948 with the first Grand Prix, right through to racing in the modern day.
The museum opens in 2 years, a place where names like Senna, Clark and Hamilton will sit alongside speed, excellence and history. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, Silverstone.
Time for a look at the weather with Matt Taylor. It felt like spring when I left home this morning.
It certainly is. It felt like we've sped through the seasons quite quickly. In fact, a complete change around over the past 24 hours. This afternoon in North East Wales, we've seen the warmest December conditions since 1972. Probably the biggest turnaround, the starkest contrast, though, have been in northern Scotland. Lovely scene here earlier on in Nairn. And in Nairn, yesterday morning, we started at -6. A southwesterly wind through last night meant temperatures continued to climb, reaching dizzy heights of 16 degrees this afternoon. Turning a little bit cooler here at the moment. Blustery night, strong to gale force winds in northern Scotland, but with some clearer skies. Warmest of the air, though, south of this weather front, which will be wriggling across England and Wales, bringing some heavy bursts of rain out towards the west later on. For all, another very mild night. Frost-free start to tomorrow, but mildest of all, where we have the wettest of the conditions. This is where your morning rush hour will not be a great one. Southwest England, Wales, northern parts of England in particular, heavy bursts of rain, also pushing through the Midlands during the morning rush hour. Either side of that zone, though, Scotland, Northern Ireland, fine and dry, but a little bit blustery. A lovely sunny start to East Anglia and the southeast. But here the cloud will thicken up during the afternoon. Patchy rain or drizzle will work its way in, and a grey afternoon for much of England and Wales. The heavy rain will ease off, but still damp in the west with mist and extensive hill fog. Scotland, Northern Ireland, brightest of all. Most places dry, sunny spells through the day. Temperatures down on today's values, but still up on where they should be for the time of year. Now, as we go through Thursday night and into Friday, southerly winds start to bring another burst of warm air across the country. So a frost-free start to Friday, but this time it's Scotland and Northern Ireland's turn for some wet and windy weather to take us through the day, especially on the hills in the west. Rain into northwest England, northwest Wales later on, but much of England and Wales dry, some breaks in the cloud, a little bit of sunshine, could lift temperatures to 15 degrees. As for your weekend, well, the mild air is confined to southernmost counties, but with it, the chance of some rain. How far north that goes, a bit uncertain. Much of northern half of the country, dry and bright, but strong to gale force winds in Scotland. That rain in the southeast may just be slow to clear on Sunday, but elsewhere, it's back to something a little bit cooler. Might be a touch of frost around first thing in the morning. Temperatures around 8 to 10 degrees, and that slightly cooler trend only lasts into Monday before some milder air works its way back. George.
All right, Matt, thanks very much. Thank you. A reminder of our main stories today. Months of uncertainty for thousands of Tata Steel workers could be at an end. Unions and managers strike a deal to save the plants. And the BBC investigation has found a 5-fold increase in the number of patients waiting in A&E for a hospital bed in England. That's all from the BBC's News at 6, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are.